Our topic today is about growing vegetables in times of drought. And being a native to Western Oregon, I never thought I'd say this, but I just loved the rain yesterday. How about you? I got excited about this topic when I heard a presentation by Amy Garrett, who is a professor in the Small Farms program at Oregon State, talking about her recent study. It's a collaborative project studying growing vegetables without added irrigation. And after her talk, I thought there were a lot of principles in that process that they're studying that we could apply to our home gardens. Because we're here in Western Oregon, we never thought drought would be a topic, but it is now, and it may become even more important in the future. We've got a lot of stress to our water resources. The water table in some areas is shrinking. We've got extremely long drought periods in the summer that we never experienced before. And eventually, municipalities may restrict the use of outside water at some point, depending on what happens with our climate. So it's a good time to start thinking about this, and this is an interesting study. Our objectives today will go over the process that they're doing, studying dry farming vegetables. We'll also try to identify techniques to help you reduce the loss of soil moisture and increase water retention in your garden soil. We'd like you to be able to take 3 actions to reduce your water use in the garden, and also learn about sources that you can use to research drought-tolerant vegetable varieties. So here's the plot at Oregon State that they're testing. There's tomatoes, there's a couple of other crops. So far, the vegetables that they're doing studies on are shell beans, corn, melons, tomatoes, and zucchini. And dry farming is something that has been practiced by commercial growers for quite a long time, but the research and the data has not been recorded. And so Oregon State is making an effort collaborating with commercial growers to get this data to determine what varieties do best, what the plant spacing should be, and other factors that are important in their success in producing vegetables. This doesn't work with all types of soil. Generally, people who are dry farming vegetables are farming in areas that have fairly deep topsoil, and they have over 20 inches of annual rainfall. And so here in Western Oregon, we'd like to think that we have over 20 inches, and we hope we do. But not all soils are going to be suitable to try dry farming, which is basically utilizing the moisture in the soil that's created during the rainy season rather than using supplemental irrigation. However, when they're first planting in their dry farm plots, they do often water the plants in initially. But other than that, they're not using supplemental irrigation. For commercial farmers, there's a couple of reasons that dry farming is important. A lot of the small farmers starting out now have small acreages, and some of those acreages really don't have water rights, so they're really restricted on their ability to irrigate at all. Also, financially, an investment in commercial irrigation equipment can be costly, so dry farming can be an option for other people who have less resources. Here is a field with dry farmed tomatoes. You can see there's no irrigation, and the area around the plants are kept weed-free. They're relying again on the soil moisture to help their production. Now, not all dirt is the same. The pile on the left is an example that has a high organic matter content. The pile on the right is basically soil that looks like subsoil. And the soil that has the high organic matter will help will retain a lot more moisture than the soil on the right. If you're located in an area with really sandy soil, you don't have too many options to restrict irrigation, because that sandy soil is not going to hold water like other soils. For instance, clay soil holds a lot of water and a lot of nutrients. A lot of people complain about having clay soil, but it's really an excellent soil to grow plants in if you properly amend it. Where to start? We're doing this presentation now in the fall because fall is a good time to prepare your garden. And if you're going to plan to garden with less irrigation, you want to make sure you have plenty of organic matter in that soil. Ideally, 5 to 7% organic matter is your target. So you can add organic matter in a variety of ways. These are pictures of some cover crops you can plant. There's red and white clover and phacelia, and you can seed those and then allow them to grow and flower. Of course, the flowers are attractive to our pollinators, so that will make Gail happy and will make our plants happy as well. You can cut these down in the spring and turn them into the soil. Some people actually leave the plants growing and hollow out areas and plant right in them. But then you've got some competition with the cover crops to your vegetable crops, so I would recommend cutting them and turning them into your soil. But you can also do other things to add organic matter. You can use your homegrown compost. You can buy commercial compost. We recommend making sure that the commercial compost is free of chemicals that may affect your vegetables. You can also use straw. Straw will take a while to break down. One of the things that you can do in adding organic matter in the fall is to apply this to the surface of your garden area, and that will help to shield the soil from compaction by our winter rains, and it will start the breakdown process, and you can turn it in the spring to add that material back into your garden. And remember that leaves are your friends. Don't bag them up and pay them to be hauled away. You can get free leaves from your neighbors, and they're great. I've used a lot of maple leaves in our garden, and they're excellent. However, the best thing to do if you're going to use them in the fall to cover the soil surface is to chop them up with your lawnmower. Otherwise, they tend to blow around in the garden. But they're excellent. They break down fairly quickly. You can chop them up and turn them right into the soil, or you use them to cover the soil surface as a mulch. You don't want to use oak leaves, but other types of leaves are great. You want to think about managing your water resources carefully. And one of the ways to do that is to use irrigation timers. This is an example of a 4-zone timer, which means that you can have 4 different settings on frequency of irrigation. You don't have to have something that complex, but they are helpful. They save time and they save water. You can plant your vegetables in zones so that you have them grouped. Those that require more water are going to be in one area, less water in another. It also helps you start watering early in the morning before the air and the water, or air and the soil warm up, so that reduces loss through evaporation. So drip irrigation is highly recommended. It delivers the most efficient system of watering right to the base of the plant. You're not watering in areas that you don't have vegetables, and thus you help restrict weed growth and competition with your vegetable plants. Drip irrigation, nowadays there's lots of options. It's fairly easy to install, move around. Here is an extreme case of drip irrigation, but it's effective. I thought it was quite fun. And if you had just a couple of plants, you could try this. Also, you can also use something we've tried, and that's taking a 5-gallon bucket, and you can put a drip irrigation dripper in the very bottom edge of the bucket. And then you can move that bucket from plant to plant. The advantage of doing that if you don't have a lot of plants is that you can add liquid fertilizer right to the water in that bucket, so you're delivering liquid fertilizer right to your plant. Steve Solomon, who is listed on your resource handout, is an author that writes a lot about gardening west of the Cascades and dry farming, and he calls that fertigation, where you're irrigating and you're fertilizing. And it's a really simple but effective system. The other thing I wanted to mention when you're looking at your garden site is if you have low areas, those will tend to accumulate water. And so if you have the option, you can put plants that require more water in your lower areas of your garden. Also, I've noticed that, as vegetable gardeners, we want to locate our garden in the most sunny area that we have. But with the intense heat we've had, the soil just bakes and plants bake. And so you can use taller plants to shade some of your more tender plants in cases like that. So take a look at your site, see what your exposure is, and use the plants you have in the landscape as well as the slope. Also, when you're preparing your garden site in the fall, you want to check your pH. And that's the best time to add lime. Because of our winter rain, a lot of our soil tends to be acid. And for vegetable growing optimally, you want to shoot for a more neutral pH. So timing is critical. When we're facing early heat, we want to think about planting earlier than we normally would. If you consult planting calendars, oftentimes those are outdated based on what has happened with our climate. So one of the tools you can use is the soil thermometer. That on the right, they're very simple, they're inexpensive, and you can check the specific temperature in your garden to determine if the soil is warm enough for your plants to start growing. Seeds have different different temperature sprouting requirements, and so you need to consult your seed packages to determine if it's suitable time to put your plants or to put your seeds in the ground. Also, because we have so much winter rain, our soil tends to get pretty soggy, and you need to check it for moisture by doing a simple squeeze test. You take a ball of soil and you squeeze it in your hand. If you open it up and if you can get the ball to crumble fairly easily, then your soil is dry enough to start working. But if it stays in a compact ball, then you want to wait a little longer so your soil dries out. Another good way to get a jump on the season is to start your seeds indoors or cold frame. There's a lot of options. Small greenhouses, very, very inexpensive and very useful in getting those early vegetables going. That way you've got some growth on your plants when you're ready to put them in the ground. And so you can move up your planting date significantly by pre-starting. You can also share plants with your friends. We found that a lot of vegetable plants that we want to use are not available in retail outlets, and they aren't available early enough. So starting your own is a good way to get what you want at the right time. So planting short season early varieties is another way. You're getting ahead of the heat. Peas and radishes, lettuce and chard are things that can grow in fairly cool temperatures, and you can get those in early. You can also plant them again for a fall crop, but you're going to be planting in late summer, and we've had really hot, dry late summers, so you will have to use more irrigation if you're going to shoot for a fall crop with these varieties. So if you're planting early, you want to be able to keep your plants warm. There are some simple ways to do that using the milk cartons. Commercial red and black plastic works well. That warms up the soil. It also restricts the weed growth and competition. The floating row cover over those hoops is another way. You don't actually have to use hoops on the row cover. You can lay them on top of the plants and anchor them on the sides. It's a very lightweight material, and it does help to keep that warmth around your plants. And then the walls of water, the blue example there, those are tubes filled with water, which slowly release the warmth to your plant throughout the night and help to keep them warm. There are specific techniques which dry farmers use they believe, to improve their growth and production. They're pre-soaking large seeds like corn and beans and squash seeds. You can pre-soak them overnight, and then they're ready to plant the following morning. They recommend pressing soil around your transplants and seeds. They believe that pressing the soil in that manner helps bring the water that's down deep in the soil up to the surface where up to the plant roots can utilize it. You can use mulch around your plants, which helps cool the soil and reduce moisture evaporation from the soil. But you don't want to add mulch until your plants are started to grow. The red plastic and the black plastic you can put under those plants that are heat loving, and you can do that early. However, it does tend to heat up the soil, so if you find that your plants in that environment are tending to fry, you could put cardboard or organic mulch over the top of it if you think it's getting too hot during late summer. But other organic mulches will help cool the soil. You want to keep your beds completely free from weeds to reduce that competition for moisture and nutrients. Planting in blocks rather than rows is another way to preserve soil moisture. The leaves will help shade the soil. An example, Three Sisters is an example where the giant squash leaves are shading the soil around the corn and the beans. Of course, the corn provides the structure for the beans to crawl up there, but the squash is what is actually, leaves are actually shading the soil. You want to plant close together, which also helps shade the soil. However, if you're trying dry farming without using supplemental irrigation, you will want to increase your spacing. The research that I've read shows they're making their rows about twice as far apart. And on the handout, you will see reference to the study at Oregon State University, and you can click on that study, you can click on that link and go to their study and see what they're doing right now. And they also have a Facebook page called Dry Farming Collaborative, and you can go there and see some of the comments about how they're proceeding with their study. And people are using different techniques, and they're pooling that information, and they'll be publishing it at some point. But this is a new study, and in terms of actually recording their production and so forth. So protecting the soil surface is something that's very important. Using weed-free mulch, organic materials, reduces evaporation. You can use leaves, chemical-free grass clippings, wheat straw, or some form of garden compost. Wheat straw is recommended. Oat straw tends to have a lot of seeds, and so those seeds would sprout and compete with your plants for moisture and nutrients. So when you're planting, they also recommend compressing the seed bed if you're planting small seeds like onions and carrots and parsnips. They have tiny seeds. You can use a simple piece of wood like this to compress the seed bed, and then you sprinkle the seeds in and lightly cover them up. And they believe, again, that brings the moisture up to where the seeds can access it. Here's an example of planting in blocks. You don't need to use an outline of wood to plant in blocks. You can use an open garden setting. It's just the idea is that the leaves are helping shade the soil. Here's an example of a mixed planting where you've got large plants shading your more tender plants. And in a garden, I mean, you can do this in a garden, planting small plants like lettuce and so forth under taller plants like tomatoes and corn. Other options for protecting your soil surface is dust mulch, and I'll talk about that in a minute. You can use cardboard, newspaper, and burlap bags. They tend they're useful in keeping your soil weed-free, and also helps cool the soil. And they break down, and you can work it right into your soil, adding organic material right in to the soil after the growing season is over. And then, of course, you can use commercial black plastic or red plastic. That does break down after a couple of years of use. And I'm not really a huge fan of plastic, but it is useful, and a lot of the commercial farmers are going to using some form of plastic as mulch. It's less labor intensive, and it's just an efficient way to do it. So dry farmers often use a dust mulch method. This hasn't been documented as being effective, but it's commonly used. They keep the top 2 inches of the soil surface loose, weed-free, and sort of fluffy. They believe it fills in the cracks and prevents moisture evaporation, prevents the movement of water by capillary action up to the soil surface. It's, of course, less expensive. Most commercial farmers cannot use organic mulch in their production. It's just too costly, and they have too much area. It would just take too much time, labor, and money. But we can in our garden, so there are many options that we can consider.
So what's in the dust mulch? Is that just soil?
Dirt. It's just, soil. Yes, it's just soil. It's loose soil, and they just make it dusty by working it. And they used a scuffle hoe in that example. It's free of anything. It's just what you've got. So I decided we should try this in our garden, which is outside Oregon City. We have a clay-type soil. And this is big beef tomato, which we harvested August 2nd. I'm not crazy about this tomato. It's one that the dry farmers use, and they're production-oriented. You know, it's a commercial-type tomato. I tend to prefer the heirloom tomatoes, and I'm going to try some other heirloom varieties this next year. This was just a quick last-minute decision to try it ourselves. We had trouble finding an area in a garden that didn't have irrigation, so that was one of the. But it was fun to try. I think I'll use some organic mulch, and you kind of do a comparison using a plastic mulch on one and organic mulch in another area. This is zucchini. They recommended dark star zucchini, and I think it's exceptionally good. It's still producing now. It's not a huge producer, but I always end up with too many zucchini anyway, so I really like this one. And the flesh is denser, and it holds up better in cooking than our irrigated zucchini. So I would definitely recommend trying it. It's fun to try this and see what you get. You know, some of the studies, and Steve Solomon in his books, which is in your handout, he says his topsoil is 4 feet deep. Well, not many of us can enjoy that. But we can, through amending with organic matter, improve our soil and the water holding capacity that it has. And just, you know, you can try different varieties and see what happens. So you want to try focusing on drought-tolerant varieties of vegetables. When we think about vegetables, if you think about heirloom varieties, a lot of those were developed before irrigation was invented. And so a lot of the early varieties do grow without a lot of supplemental water. Certainly a lot of Native Americans in arid regions of the United States grew beans and different corn, and some of those varieties are still available. We also recommend using local seed sources because those seeds have been developed from plants that are growing in our region and they're adapted to our climate. On your handout, there is a list of some local seed sources. If you focus on open pollinated varieties, then you can choose the plants that do well in your garden one year and save seed from those plants. And then you can share it with friends and plant again the next year. It's recommended that you plant more vining crops like melons, cucumbers, squash peas, and shell beans. These tend to require less water. And we recommend reviewing the literature on dry farming and try some of their recommended varieties. And their production results aren't in yet for this year, but I'm sure they'll post them when they are. Examples of some vining crops. So what is important in summary? Feed your soil lots of organic matter, 5 to 7%. And every year, because organic matter is broken down by soil organisms, you want to add about 2 inches every year and work that in. Conserve water by using drip irrigation, timers, and hand watering. Mulching, organic mulch, commercial plastic, and dust mulch are options. You want to keep your garden weed-free. And you want to choose drought-tolerant varieties of vegetables. And most importantly, eat your vegetables. Thank you.